How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another interview session on Locally Sourced. I'm Carter, usual host, and today my guest is Heath Howard. He is running for the CD1 seat, which is being vacated by Chris Pappas. He's currently a state representative, and if I'm not mistaken, the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. Heath, how you doing today, man?
One slight correction. I'm the vice chair of the House
Vice
Progressive
chair,
Caucus.
excuse me, vice chair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes.
No worries, no worries. Again, I know Ali Murray, our chair, would appreciate me correcting that.
Yeah, no, by all means, I don't want to
Yeah,
get things wrong here.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But
all right,
great to be.
go ahead.
Yeah, great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. So, um, I'm gonna start off with a question that I'm trying to ask specifically people that are running for like a national seat. Because I say this because for anybody that has not seen previous episodes or doesn't know anything about me, I'm a carpenter by day, and I spend a lot of time working with blue collar dudes or the no collar dudes, as the case may be. Um, and I was talking with a coworker today, and mentioned we were doing this, and he he didn't know about you, or really he doesn't really pay that much attention to like in the weeds politics, but he kind of made a statement about like, oh yeah, politics is super fucked up and like you can't trust any of them, whatnot. And so the question that I want to start with is something we see a lot with people that run for national office is like they'll, and I mean sometimes in local seats too, but generally speaking, like people get down to Washington, and the kind of what's that movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or whatever. You get there and all of a sudden like the machine just starts to beat you down, and like you're subjected to lobbyists and special interest groups and whatnot. And so on a much more like ephemeral philosophical level, like let's say you make it through the primary and then you make it through the general and you go down to Washington. What's your sort of like mental plan, your emotional plan to be able to resist the pressures of that stuff? Because I think like a lot of times people are very worried that they're like, yeah, I'll elect a politician, they'll go down, they'll cave to like whatever rich bastard is gonna, you know, try and get in their pocket, and that's a concern that people have. So I'm just curious to hear how you respond to that particular
Yeah,
issue.
yeah. I mean, unlike a lot of people, I have a record of trying to fight back against this type of corruption, and in this type of lobbying that we have that has become commonplace. And I think that it's really important that we have people who are going to stand on those values. I've been very clear on this campaign that I'm not taking any corporate PAC funds. I'm not taking any money from groups like AI PAC, and it's something where you can look at my record, you can look at my history. I've never taken corporate PAC funds. It's something where I've been completely grassroots funded every single time that I've run, and I think that that's really important to making sure that we actually have leaders who are actually funded by the people that they are going to represent. I mean, a majority of my donors are people who live right here in New Hampshire. And I think that it's important that we have to think locally when it comes to our elected officials. Unlike a number of other people who may have gone to an Ivy League university or whatnot. I grew up here. I went to Spalding High School in Rochester, New Hampshire. Not necessarily known for being the best school, but I think that it's a great school. I think it's an amazing school with an amazing community. And I went to the University of New Hampshire. I've been here my entire life. I'm a seventh generation Granite Stater, and it's something where I think that we need people who are going to stand up to the system as is, and really push back, because I think that, being on the younger side of the spectrum, it is important that we also think about the fact that this country that our ancestors have built, we really, I think, have a duty to try and uphold the rights that should be enshrined for everyone, but are seemingly are being stripped away.
Yeah. No, decent answer, man. And I mean, it's like, I think there's probably a certain amount of people feeling like they would be happy to hear about sort of your background. I too am a New Hampshire native. I've been here for 31 of my 36 years, and it's, setting aside the time I was in college in Boston, which was a pretty formative experience for me. This is the place that I am and I love, and I'm where I'm from, and it's, like, my high school is recently sued the bejesus out of the state over the education funding. I was, kind of proud of them. So, it generally speaking, that's a, a halfway decent answer, and I'll take it. So I regarding PAC money, right now you're sort of the lead candidate uh in the race, the primary race is Stephanie Shaheen. Now, like, anybody that's ever tuned into my channel before knows that I'm not exactly a fan of the Shaheen family. Um, you mentioned taking PAC money. So far, Stephanie Shaheen has received $324,452 just through Act Blue. And her family through has completely maxed out private contributions to the tune of 21,000 for the primary and then another 21,000 for the general. And she's thrown in 7K of her own money. She's gotten $10,500 from JB Pritzker. So, I mean, like, for anybody that wants to talk about how JB Pritzker is some sort of progressive champion, I want to try and put that to bed right here and right now. But I mean, there's a lot of big money that's coming into her campaign, a
Yeah.
lot of it from out of state, and people can go to the FEC website and have a look for themselves to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When it comes to this, you've got on your platform, you talk about ending Citizens United, and I
Yeah.
think that's something that speaks pretty concisely to, like, the interests of where a lot of regular people are at, where they just want to see the end of money. And I'm aware that you seem fairly, given that you did call out Gene Shaheen at a dinner, which was a pretty, like, rewarding moment for a lot of the people on the progressive side of things here in New Hampshire. You seem pretty measured about your willingness to, like, directly attack your candidate or your primary opposition. So where do you fall in terms of, like, how you're approaching taking on a challenger that's so entrenched in dynastic New Hampshire politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just hit the nail right on the head. It's dynastic. And it's something where I don't really believe that the experience that is being brought to the table is one that really warrants the type of praise. I should rephrase that. um, but I mean, it is something where I Senator Shaheen, I do appreciate her, in her service in a lot of regards, but it is just foolishness to believe some of these people and accept a handshake agreement. And I mean, we saw that today. It came to fruition. The Republicans had a vote on this, and it didn't meet the 60 vote requirement that they needed in order to bring it to the floor. And I don't think that that is acceptable for how we as a people are in such need of these ACA tax credits. And I think the population of New Hampshire and the people of New Hampshire really understand that. I mean, I mean, I've talked to people and they've been very vocal about how upset they are about the current situation. And this just felt so avoidable in a lot of ways, where we could have stood so much stronger against a lot of the proposals that the Republicans had put into that continuing resolution. And I don't really think that it was a smart thing to support. And this is also, something that is not necessarily just going to be about the political decisions, but it's about the fact that this costs people's lives. This is going to kill people, and I can't really stand by that, and I can't really accept that.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I personally I get my health insurance through the ACA, and I mine tripled personally. And I'm currently trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with that. I was sort of waiting for any kind of information to come through. Hopefully something would work out, and I now know I'm going to have to sign up this weekend. I was like waiting right until the end of the open enrollment period, and it's just yeah, it's a nightmare.
It is.
You know, I it's like I think there's another part of it that, it's like Stephanie Shaheen is was the, I think, COO, or CEO rather, of what bills itself as a fintech health company that basically works as a middleman to provide nutrition programs for people using Medicare dollars. And my immediate thought when I saw her sort of disagreeing with her mom's choice there is, I'm like, yeah, but I mean, you're not really directly impacted by that, aside from the fact that your company is now probably having less government dollars in the bag. Like, that's
Yeah,
not something that you feel personally, that's something that your wallet feels. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
and that's just, yeah, it's really, it's a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but I think at the end of the day, it is something where I think that it is something that we need to talk about is the proposals that are being put forward when it comes to healthcare. I mean, I have not heard anything about her supporting Medicare for all. I think that that
Right.
is a really important value that we have to hold strong to, because we have to be honest. I mean, and this is something where, I mean, people like Senator Shaheen refuse to admit that the ACA tax subsidies and the ACA as a whole is not working in a positive manner. It is better, I think, than before the ACA and the way that the market worked. But that's basically like saying that a small pile of garbage is better than a large pile of garbage. It's like it's still a
Right.
pile of garbage at the end of the day, because
Yeah.
I mean the profit incentives are still there for these insurance companies to exploit people who just need health care.
Yeah, and I mean, and the people always forget that the ACA is literally a rebranded Republican plan that Mitt
Exactly.
Romney rolled out in Massachusetts. Like, this isn't like it wasn't even Obama's idea. They just copy pasted a plan that was essentially subsidizing an industry that's literally designed to prey on sick people.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, it's disappointing. I think that the way that this could have turned out would have been so much better if there was a public option initially. But that's not where we are. And I think that we've seen in countries like Australia, where they have gone from a universal model to a tiered model, how that affects people in a detrimental manner, even to just have two separate tiers. And that's where I think that we need to have that a universal single payer system where everybody is treated equally. And making sure that people get the care that they need is, I think, a human right that the United States has not recognized.
Right. Well, and I mean, and this is sort of an interesting thing because I literally just made a video about this the other day, um, where it's like it's not a right in this country. It should be a right, but it's not. And I find that to be incredibly disgusting. I just to like put it out there. That's it but like people always forget that the flip side of the coin that is rights is responsibilities. And you have to take responsibility for the people that you elect to hold them to account, to make sure that they are in agreement that what we all agree should be a right, which is like, being healthy, living to an old age, is something that's a consensus. And
Yep.
we've chosen to capitalize that particular need that people have. It's an inelastic thing. You know what I mean? In the same way that I mean, this gets into a different topic a little bit, and we can save it for a little later, but it's like I find housing to be the same thing. It's like we've
Yep.
chosen to commodify something that has inelastic demand. Everyone needs a roof over their head. And
Yep.
I think there's sort of the broader philosophical look at like, well, what do we even, when we say something's a right, what does that even mean? You know?
Yeah. I mean, to be frank, it's the fact that the United Nations, in their Declaration for Human Rights, they include healthcare. I mean, the United States is violating international law by not having a universal healthcare system. And I think that in terms of what we have to consider a right, we do have to consider that the planet and the globe has considered healthcare to be a right. And I think that, especially in the richest nation in the world, we can afford to give people that healthcare. And it is kind of funny, listening to some conservatives talk about this point where it's like you're not entitled to people's labor. And I always think back to the fact that our founding fathers, implemented trial by jury. That was one of the big things that they wanted to push forward to make sure that the common man had the opportunity to have a case heard in front of a court of their peers. And I think that, we clearly have kind of drifted away from that kind of mentality in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because my immediate thought is like, well, we're not entitled to someone else's labor, but I mean, isn't jury duty a form of labor? Like, is it like I mean, not only is it labor to go in and have to like engage in this process of
Yeah,
hearing and at the case and making a judgment on it, whatever. It's also removing you from your actual labor that
yeah,
you need in order to pay your bills.
exactly. Yeah.
So that's a bit contradictory to me.
Yeah, it is. And but at the same end, it is a job that somebody has to
Right.
take up. And
It's a
it is a
duty.
response.
It's a
Exactly.
responsibility.
They have It's a responsibility. And it is something that the government does pay people to go and do. And it's the
Right.
same thing for, the judge, it's the same thing for public defenders, and it's the same thing for prosecutors.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. So while we're on the topic of healthcare, you've talked about this in a number of different locations, so I won't get too deep into it, but you experienced a very grave injury at a young age. And rather than getting into the whole story, which people can go and they can check out your social media, they can hear that story. My question is, what was sort of the most galvanizing moment through all of that that made you look at the system and decide that advocating for something like Medicare for all was a position that you had to take moving into politics going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's my mom. She's the one who would always spend hours fighting with insurance companies on the phone, and it was really something where I appreciate her more than anybody else. It is something where I look at what she did for me when I first broke my back. I remember her spending every single one of her sick days, every single one of her vacation days to spend with me in the hospital, and I am very thankful for that. It is definitely impactful seeing that person who is fighting, tooth and nail for you to get, the care that you need. Because, I mean, at the time, it was her fighting, the nursing staff a little bit because I was being put in an anti-clotting bed. So they move. And when you have a fractured spine, it's not exactly the best thing to be moving around. And so I had to find a stationary
Yeah.
bed, and so my mom was able to get that for me, and she was able to find one somewhere in the hospital. And it was things like that where she was fighting tooth and nail to make sure that I was getting everything that I needed. And yet, the biggest hassle, it wasn't the nursing staff, it wasn't the doctors, it wasn't, the hospital administration, it was the insurance company. That was the biggest problem. That was always the biggest hitch. And I think that that's a little bit problematic when you have trained medical professionals giving approval for things, and then we don't have approval from the insurance company. It's like, oh, well, you actually need prior authorization for that. It's like, okay, we're in a hospital. Like, it shouldn't be that hard. And it's just this constant mess that I think we need to resolve, because otherwise, I think we're going to continue to see an increase in the cost of healthcare in this country and a decrease in the actual healthcare outcomes that people are receiving.
Yeah. So let's sort of change direction here a little bit. I mean, not that it's, I mean, it's all really connected though, huh? Um, so yeah, it all sort of relates to each other. And this gets it. So a lot of people, I hear a lot of people talk about how they really miss Lena Khan,
Yeah,
and I certainly do too. Um, Antitrust.
yeah,
Where like, do you feel like antitrust is something that's like an incredibly important part of your campaign? I know, it's like I don't necessarily I understand that End Citizens United is part of that, but it's a little less discussed on the platform that you have on your website right now. And I just want to sort of kind of get more of a feel of where you're at on antitrust specifically, like to give a little bit of context here, right? At this particular moment while we're recording this interview, there's a big hullabaloo about the merger of Warner Brothers and Netflix, and this sort of fight between the Ellison family, and just we're seeing a broader consolidation of media in general. Now,
yeah,
I mentioned I'm a carpenter. I'm also a member of IATSE, which is the Studio Mechanics Union across the country. I'm part of the local 481, which covers all of the New England states with the exception of Connecticut. Now, the in general, the movie workforce is I build sets for movies. The workforce that works on movies is thoroughly unionized. It's, I mean, you have several different unions that are pivotal in that. Writers Guild, Directors Guild, SAG, IATSE, and the Teamsters are pretty involved too. Um, the I have a lot of us have experienced a significant downshift in the amount of work available to us because of corporate mergers, because of contract negotiations that have gone on where they wanted to use AI to write scripts, or they wanted to take the likeness of actors and they wanted to you know use it indefinitely without ever having to pay the actors for their labor. Um and so there's a sort of evil synergy that's happening there at the corner of antitrust and union busting in a lot of ways. And it's like it's one thing to be supportive of unions, and I know that you have the most support from unions out of any of the candidates running, which I think is great. I think kind of the flip side of that coin is the corporate consolidation that's occurring that is sort of indirectly engaging in union busting activities. So that's one side of the question about antitrust. The other side is sort of private equity and how that plays into things like private equity companies coming in and buying up houses and, paying cash on hand at higher than asking price and basically forcing families to not be able to find housing. So this is like a very, very intricate problem that I think goes over a lot of people's heads. And I'm curious as to where you sort of sit on all this.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of concerns about, the consolidation of a lot of these large corporations. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we are seeing these multi-billion-dollar deals being made, yet the workers are being completely left out or being screwed over. And I think that we really need to, uplift these people any way that we can, and we need to make sure that we are able to protect the industries that these people rely on. And I think that, in terms of the market that has been set up, we do need to have competition in some regard. It is something where you have to look at the different types of markets that are available and make decisions as to whether they are elastic or inelastic. Because a lot of these things, like you mentioned, healthcare, housing, education, they can all be super inelastic, or I mean, super elastic, where they can cost relatively whatever, and people will pay the price for it. I mean, I think that there is a definite line where these different areas are not necessarily being promoted as well as they should. And I mean, in areas like the housing market that you mentioned, where these private equity firms are coming in, buying up these single family homes, what is that doing? That's destroying the housing market. If they're paying $50,000, $100,000 over asking price, and then they're turning around and renting these properties out as short-term Airbnbs rather than long-term rentals. So it's not actually putting another unit on the market. It's artificially uh, removing those units from the market while allowing for developers to make more money off of building homes that people are not actually going to live in. And I think that that's a real problem because we need to make sure that people are really the center and focus of our economy. Because profits are all well and good, but ultimately we need to be thinking about the well being and affordability of people to live their day to day lives.
Right. And this is something that I think the whole abundance movement kind of like just completely misses, right? Their notion is the fucking Ezra Klein dude. Anyways, um they they seem to think that if we just simply engage in zoning reform and deregulation that we're going to solve the issue. And it doesn't really address the issues like private equity. It also doesn't address issues of um sort of subsidy, right? Now this is something that I have been on about for a long time, and I'm curious to hear where you stand on this. Um when it comes to subsidizing housing, there's a lot of ways that you could do that. But do you believe that creating some sort of public housing subsidy would be beneficial to the people of not just New Hampshire, but the country at large?
Yeah, when we're talking about public housing projects, they have to be mixed income. And when you look at the most successful public housing projects, they are all multi income level, and it allows for an opportunity in particular, instead of classifying a lot of these individuals or families into neighborhoods that are of the same class, it allows for a lot of opportunities for class movement and for people to actually lift themselves up. And I think that that's really something that we need to be talking about if we're going to pursue public housing projects, because oftentimes they're just seen as the projects, which we need to really talk about how we can uplift it more than just what has been traditionally done.
And so I completely agree with that. And I think we've done public housing an incredibly racist and draconian way here in the United States, and then we use the failures of that horrible implementation to point at it and say, look, it's terrible, we shouldn't do this. And it's like, well, yeah, because you did it in a really asinine way. um you know I to my understanding, and I could be I could be getting parts of this wrong, but something that I'm aware of, we're talking about this notion of private equity coming in and buying up houses, right? To my understanding, in China, now people that before anybody freaks the hell out, um, in China, something that they'll do, the government will purchase homes and then offer like 100-year lease on a home at a reasonable rate to the people. Do you think that that is an idea, like that type of reconception of what public housing is or what it could look like? Do you think that's something that's worth entertaining?
I think that that is a better alternative than people turning to selling their homes to private equity. I think that that is definitely something that can be considered and discussed. It's how we move forward with this. I think is definitely going to require a number of different solutions, and it's going to require creative solutions. So it is something where we have to try and put forward a number of different options and alternatives for folks.
Right. And I don't necessarily mean like whole cloth, like you're like like I said, there's a lot of ways to sort of crack that egg, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like full government ownership of the home and then you're directly leasing it from the government. You could have it go a number of different ways where you could say the government allots a certain amount of subsidy to a family that's trying to move into a single home or whatever. But it's the notion here is to create alternative ways of dignified living for people that are
Yeah.
trying to you know improve their quality of life. And then also I feel like that could resuscitate certain communities that are dying out or have no local economy, like degrading infrastructure, what have you, right? I'm a fan of, I like the idea of using the government as a jobs program, to help say fix up like destitute buildings, like decrepit buildings, ref, make them better. Let's look at what stock we have available. Let's improve those things. Let's find a way to sort of cut that, because if we can decrease homelessness that way. We can increase the sort of just retained wealth that people will have, that can create upward mobility to a point where they're able to get into a market that maybe they're able to get a more luxurious home that there is outside the subsidy bracket, whatever, right? There's a bunch of ways to deal with this, but I get sort of frustrated when people um refuse to look at models outside of our country because American exceptionalism, and see like, hey, maybe like what's working in this place that we might have traditionally just like written off entirely because we're subject to red baiting for, you know, the better part of a century or more.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think that, we as Americans do tend to write off a number of different ideas from other countries that work well. And it is something where we have to kind of come up with options that we can pursue that would actually help alleviate these problems. And looking at other countries and how they have solved, similar problems, I think is definitely the way that we need to be turning to, because the American exceptionalist idea that we're going to just solve it and make it all better, that has not worked. I mean,
Right.
over the past 40 years, things have seemingly progressively gotten worse on a number of different factors. Whether we're talking about media transparency, whether we're talking about healthcare costs, whether we're talking about education prices, housing, the whole nine. You can look at whatever you want and you can see how things have just exploded in terms of cost, in terms of actual options that people have. And I think that that's really a concern that is something that Americans need to really handle and focus on, because otherwise we're not necessarily going to solve these problems.
Right. And I think, something I appreciate about your platform as a whole, if you step back and look at it as a whole, is I mean, I really appreciate the emphasis you place on workers, right? Something I like to say, something I like to sort of harp on myself is that, like, I think one of the best tools that we have to uplift just every single marginalized community, every single one, whether it's on racial lines or gender or, if you're disabled, what have you. There's sort of the great equalizer that in a lot of ways we all have to work, and if we're not working, we're relying on somebody that has to work, right? That's, I mean, in a family, it's like, and most people, I think you're a great example of this. I know and have a number of friends that have disabilities, and there's not a single one of them that does not want to be productive, that does not want to contribute, that does not want to work, right? And I think that when we accept that work is sort of the great equalizer, right? It's really kind of the thing that unites us all, the drive to be productive, to create in whatever sense applies to to an individual. Um and that's one of the best uniting tools that we have. And I think people get caught up when they think about sort of the liberal emphasis that we really saw take prevalence in the 90s going up till now, that tried to place identity politics issues first in favor of sort of subverting the class argument. And I find that your platform speaks very specifically to class issues. And what I think is so interesting about that is that you are somebody who has experienced disability. And so I'd like to sort of, it's like, in many ways you're making the argument from the position of one of these marginalized spaces, and I'd like to sort of hear how you understand that position, because I think it would be valuable for people to see why that's the in a sense the class first argument does not mean everything else is somehow secondary or tertiary to the argument itself, that it's actually all one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, we have to think about how people are able to live their lives. And the thing is that we've unfortunately had, I feel, a lot of these issues that are related to identity being used as wedge issues to divide the country, and people who, you know, may agree with us on economic policy, may be, turned off by the, whatever culture war crap is being put forward. And I feel like that is really kind of the point. It's to distract us from really what we need to be talking about. And I think that there is really kind of a necessity for us to really get back to talking about the economic impact that democratic policies actually have. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the Democrats in 2024, most of them lost, across the country. It was very, very clear that the Republicans were better at messaging on things like affordability. And Democrats ended up suffering. And what happened in 2025 was there have been a number of Democrats running on affordability. Look at New York City with Zoran Mamdani winning an absolutely insane mayoral race where he focused on affordability and was able to talk about it from a position of an economics, an understanding of economics that I think is very similar to, people like myself. And I think that that's really important to be able to kind of highlight the fact that Democrats actually do have the opportunity to win it, and they not just Democrats, but people who are running on these policies have the opportunity to win and actually make a huge impact in their communities.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's sort of important to ignore the noise of all that culture war stuff as an elected official? I mean, like, I think something that I see, there's a lot of argument going on amongst leftist circles right now about everybody being disappointed that Zoran Mamdani was, sort of, as people are saying, put his thumb on the scale in terms of the primary challenge against Hakeem Jeffries with Chiose, and like that, like my personal reaction to that is like, look, like Zoran's got a lot of very important policies that he needs to put forward, and Hakeem Jeffries is very, very capable of standing directly in the path of all of those things. And so there's a certain amount of like battle picking that needs to happen here. And I th- I think that sort of like political mindset is important for people to keep in mind, that this is an incredibly cutthroat arena.
Yeah.
And my question is sort of like, do you feel like you have those kind of chops to really like put your foot down about stuff and just be like, no, like I'm not dealing with that nonsense. I mean, like, I think Bernie Sanders is pretty good at this too. Like, criticisms of Bernie aside, I think there's some positions that I don't necessarily fully like see eye to eye with him on, like more or less related to like his hesitancy to call what's happening, like his sort of like late arrival to calling what Israel was doing in Palestine a genocide. Like that is certainly a critique that I would have of Bernie Sanders at this point, despite how much I may like personally ride or die for the dude. Like, there's this question of like having the fortitude to just tune that noise out. You feel like that's something that you've sort of like you got the stock for?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think that there are times where it's important to, speak up and do what we can. And there are times where I have spoken on, some of these issues, because I do think that, at the end of the day, we do also have to do what we can to, try and, help people understand, the positions that we have. And I mean, I also think that, the way of talking about it also, instead of being, as individualistic and identity specific as we are, I mean, we need to be talking about how people have, individual freedoms and individual rights that we need to protect. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, people who are just trying to live their lives without impacting another person are being told how and what they can do, whether it be, with LGBTQ plus rights, whether it be with reproductive rights, whether it be with disability rights. We are seeing all these problems at the end of the day, but it's coming back to humanity, I think, that we really need to focus on in those individualistic rights that people do have, and really, making sure that people understand that. And I think that that's really kind of the best argument that we can put forward, because it's a way of using, arguments that I've heard conservatives bring forward. And I think that that is something that resonates with people, and we need to use and learn from the successes that other people are having.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so I thank you. Um I just sort of was going to use this moment anyways, but it's like, I just mentioned sort of my personal gripes with Israel, and you have directly spoken out and called what's going on overseas a, a genocide. Now, I want to. I just recently put out a video. Here's the shameless plug moment. And people can go check it out on the channel. But I just put out a video that sort of explores the military-industrial complex in the state of New Hampshire, and it is a massive part of our state economy, absolutely massive. And it's, I mean, it's not just guns, right? It's optics, it's laser guided missiles, it's aerospace tech, it's work, like we have Raytheon, we have BAE Systems, we have Sig Sauer, we have L3 Harris, we have, there are, the list goes on and on. And there's a really sort of unfortunate rock and hard place situation that we're in this state, where there are so many jobs that are tied up in
Yep.
international conflict, and there's an incredible amount of money that comes into this state, not just from those, like it comes by way of National Defense Authorization Acts funding private corporations to design tech that is then used by the military, right? Um, there's also the fact that, New Hampshire's exports to Israel total over $184 million. The percent change in that from 23 to 24 was 70.53%, right? We are Israel's number 9 ranked trade partner. Um, we're so deeply tied to this country that essentially acts as a weapons testing lab for us, right? And we have this sort of plausible deniability as Americans, where and as a country, where we can sort of let Israel do all of this really sort of just dark, grim development of weapons tech on the Palestinian people, and we here are benefiting and paying bills with blood on our hands in the state of New Hampshire directly because of this. Now, I understand that there's sort of a hesitation to want to attack this particular industry because of the jobs that it produces for people in the state, but those jobs are also, for the production line workers, the blue collar side of those jobs, right? They're making, in many cases, less than $70,000 a year, which means that they are paying over 30% of their income on housing anyways, right? And even with those higher level jobs, you're talking about like maybe at best like 250,000. And that's like, you've got government clearance, you've like security clearances, you're an engineer, like you went to school, like you're paying off student loan debts, right? And even that is still a degree of poverty in this country, where, we look at the numbers on Black Friday, and it was the lowest number of sales but also the biggest return. And the point that that makes is that the top 10% of earners are the ones that are carrying the economy in this instance. I'm trying to paint a picture here.
Yep.
about just the how deep we are in. We are not knee deep, we are shoulder deep in this problem. And it this does in a way loop back around to the very first question I asked, which is sort of the resistance to lobbyists and special interest groups and whatnot. Um, Again, it's all connected. Um, what's your stance on just the fact that we are so deeply tied to this, uh, and the fact that you are calling what's happening over there a genocide? Because it is, and I think people, it's hard for folks to deny when they see videos of families, children being killed by Israeli occupation forces.
Yeah, I mean it's really disturbing looking at what's happening in Gaza, and I mean to the Palestinians. And I think that we as Americans, I don't really, I think, can afford to continue providing these weapons to Israel. And it's not that we're just giving them money. It's the fact that the U.S. government is paying for these weapons that then Israel is being given. I mean, we're it's kind of funny that we call it military aid, because the last thing it's doing is aiding the people of Gaza. And I just don't think that that's acceptable. And I have been very firm on the fact that I will not vote to support a furthering of these subsidies being sent to Israel. I don't think that that's acceptable. And I mean, still the defense corporations and industry, I think, is one that we desperately need to try and move away from. There are a lot of other things that these engineers could be doing, and putting their talents and efforts towards tasks that would actually benefit the population rather than kill a population would definitely be an advantage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we there's been reporting that's come out. Friend of the show, Colin Booth, who works for Granite Post, he just recently published an article. It was just the other day about how Kelly AI has received the maximum donation of $15,000 from Sig Sauer after she basically made it so that they couldn't be legally pursued for handguns that are
Yep.
misfiring, that are literally they're injuring police. And this is like,
Yeah,
look, like I people might get kind of twisted about this when I say this. Like I actually I like the cops in my town, frankly.
yeah,
Um Generally speaking, the cops in my town spend more time doing uh like animal control stuff than they do really like hounding
yeah,
folks. They've been really good here. Um and so I think like, I understand defund the police. I think, what I find hilarious about Zoran Mamdani's campaign is everybody was like, "Whoa, you walked away from defund the police," and it's like, no, not in a sense, not really. He literally made every single argument surrounding what the actual defund the police movement was without ever using the slogan, which I think was fascinating. And really, the idea is to actually divert the unnecessary jobs that police have to do so that they can focus on actually keeping communities safe. So when I hear about police officers who are being supplied weapons that they need in order to do their job, in a sense, um,
yep,
that's a separate discussion. But
yep.
for that to just be sort of poo pooed by the governor, and it's really like it hurts to see that, you know?
Well, it's not very pro law enforcement, because I mean, as you said and as you mentioned, a majority of the lawsuits that are coming out, or that were coming out against Sig Sauer, were filed by police officers. And it's just very troubling, because I mean, the firearm that they are complaining about, it's the P238. It's a handgun that does not have a safety. And I think that that is something where there is a liability to producing such a weapon, especially if that is also being sold and contracted to police officers. I mean, I think that, realistically speaking, I think that all of our police officers should be using some sort of safety on their firearm. And if there's a firearm that's able to go off while it's holstered, like that weapon, I don't think that that should be protected in a lot of ways. And I mean, I did vote on that legislation to actually put forth liability for gun manufacturers like Sig Sauer when it comes to things like that, because I do think that they do have a responsibility, especially once they do know that it is a problem, that they do have to rectify it.
Right. And this kind of wraps into the more overall conversation. I mean, like a separate story that came out was reported by Reuters. BAE Systems just won a $1.7 billion contract with the US Navy to create guidance systems for missiles. This gets into the idea of the it, what responsibility does the manufacturer of a weapon have when someone is hurt or killed with the weapon that they made? And this seems to be a debate that people are having. For me, I see it and I don't really understand how that's a debate, because that death or that, you know, casualty, what have you, would not have occurred had the weapon not existed. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult for responsibility to be absolved on the part of the maker. Who's like, oh, I don't know, man, I just put it together. Like, that seems kind of like a hollow argument. Like, I don't understand what the basis for that is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also the fact that like the weapon itself is not functioning as it is intended, and we're saying, "Oh no, that's okay actually because it's a firearm." It's like, if you have a car, that is not necessarily produced correctly, there are, lemon laws that
Right.
exist so that you can handle that. That, just for example, I mean, this is something where there are ways forward to, handle these types of things. And I don't really think that, just giving them a blank check to say, well, whatever you guys do doesn't actually matter. You don't have any sort of consequence for your actions, really kind of plays poorly with I think the requirements, and especially the importance of the job that they have in designing a weapon that I think does need to be safe in a lot of regards in to the actual user. But we're seeing a situation where, in terms of the liability that is being provided, it's all on the individual rather than the corporation that failed to actually do its job correctly.
Right. And then, so just the final leg of this, and then we'll log off for today. Um, Education, right? I'm a staunch believer that, like, education is probably the most important baseline for democracy, just as a whole.
Yeah.
Um, we're now looking at the entire country being subjected to something that people in New Hampshire are incredibly familiar with, which is the voucher program.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a lot there is such a deluge of reporting about this. How unsuccessful that program has been, and how the the removal of the restrictions on that program, removing the income cap that was there, and how we are now seeing it's like the wealthiest people in our state are using tax dollars to send their children to religious schools, and that's not doing anything to aid students, families who are in communities that are lacking in dollars because they don't have like a donor town that funds their public school system to a certain extent. Meanwhile, these same families that are sending their children to private schools will still, if they have a disabled child, they will still send that disabled child to public schools because the public schools are the only place where these children with disabilities are able to actually get any kind of services they need. Meanwhile, those funds are being effectively drained out of those schools, which is reducing the quality of any of those supports that those disabled children might have. Um, I personally find it really disgusting. And education for all is one of your main planks. So I just sort of want to, you you have a very positive um approach when you talk about it on your platform, and I think it's really wonderful that you are framing your campaign in a way that gives people something to vote for. Um, what I am curious about is sort of your general critique of that system. I mean, I just described it in a very like peripheral way, but I think you probably, being a state legislator, you're a lot closer to sort of the nuts and bolts of this. And like we just had a state legislator who it was instrumental in the implementation of a lot of the most grotesque policies that we're seeing that led to this. And he basically he just resigned. He's gone.
Yeah.
And so I'm just sort of curious, like, to hear your criticism of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a program that, to be frank, is unconstitutional. I mean, when Republicans discussed this bill when it was first coming forward, they talked about how Maine actually lost a case in front of the Supreme Court, saying that they had to fund a religious school. There's a very, very large difference between us and Maine. We have a section of our Constitution that explicitly says that no sect of any religion or school thereof shall receive tax dollars from the state of New Hampshire. And I think that that's very clear that we should not be giving these handouts to these religious schools in the way that we are, because 19 of the top 20 recipients for the EFA program are all religious based institutions. And I don't necessarily think that it is constitutional to pursue this type of program. Secondly, you're completely correct in the fact that this is draining money away from our already underfunded education system. It would help, I think, a lot if we just had a statewide funding program where the state was the one who managed school funding, and helped kind of from the top down. I think that that would be significantly better than the way that we have it now, where the money is not necessarily coming from the state, but it's coming mostly from the locality. And then that money is then not necessarily leaving said locality. And, we have some places where, students are being provided, $45,000 plus per year for their education. And then on the flip side, you have students that are barely getting 5,000. So there's a very large difference in the type of funding that we are seeing being provided to our students across the state. And I think that it's an inequity that can easily be fixed if we actually had a funding model. And, this is something where even still, I was hoping, one of the main bills that I had prime sponsored this past year, HB 603, great number, it focused on special education funding. And in particular, it would have made it so that the state is the one that managed special education funding. I mean, there's a lot of pressure being put on the families of students with special education, and those needs need to be met. but they can also drastically increase the cost, especially for small communities, that people feel on their taxes. And there can be a lot of pressure and blame being placed on these families because of that. And that's one of the many problems that we have with the current funding model, because it really does punish people who are just trying to live their lives. And, if their kid it has special needs, they deserve an education just as every other child does. And I don't think that they should be punished or ostracized because of that. And this is an easy way that we could have helped solve that problem. Plus, it would have operated at an economies of scale that fits our state better, because it means that students, especially even those in small districts, are guaranteed to get the funding that they deserve. And I think that that is something where we are desperately needing an increase in that. It's something that I've heard a lot. My mom, I've mentioned her before, but she works as an occupational therapist in the Rochester Special Education Department, and we see it. I hear it all the time, and how much we desperately need to try and uplift the opportunities that these kids have.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess the I like your answer. Final sort of like question that we can end on here. Um the ever legendary how are we going to pay for it question. I think in a lot of ways what it comes down to is my personal opinion, and that's just I know a lot of people say this, but it can be summed up neatly in the tax the rich adage.
Yeah.
um
Yep.
eh, uh, Simply put, now I mean, like, there's ways to deal with that, right? Like there's approaches to that. I would personally like to see us return to that sort of like post World War II era of taxation where it was like it was like the equivalent of, say, like, you're getting taxed normally up to what would be in today's dollars about 3 million a year, which is already just an incredible number, right? And then
Yeah.
the idea is that you would be taxed 90 cents on the dollar for every dollar that you made after that 3 million. And that
Yeah.
would functionally create the redistribution of wealth sufficient enough to resolve a lot of the inequity that we see in this country. Like, I'm
Yeah.
a firm believer that billionaires they shouldn't exist. That every billionaire that we see is a failure of policy. And I just sort of want to get that one final check in with you that, like, do you feel like that's the method by which you would like to see us kind of claw back some of those funds for just regular everyday people?
Yeah, I think taxing the rich is one way that we can definitely do that. And it's not just taxing the rich, but it's taxing these large corporations as well. That I mean, and they frustrate the hell out of me, because they're making billions of dollars in profit every year, getting huge subsidies and tax breaks, and then they turn around and say to their employees how they can qualify for federal benefits. And it's just like, you have the money to be able to pay for it. And if you can't be trusted to provide that to your employees, I think you need to be taxed accordingly. I also think that, these programs, they also pay for themselves. There's a huge economic benefit to pursuing these programs. When we're talking about universal health care, I mean, to start, I mean, going back to that conversation with Republicans talking about work requirements for things like Medicaid. Uh, you know, I think that you need to be healthy in order to work. If I'm not feeling well, I can't really do my job as efficiently as possible. And that's something where people in the disability community are being thrown under the bus and being told, well, you actually have to get a job and you just need to suck it up in order to get your care. And that's just not how that works. It's a catch 22 where you're asking somebody to do something that, if they don't feel well enough to do it, how can they possibly complete the task you're assigning to them? And then when we're looking at things like education, free trade or from public universities, when we're talking about an education in general, see an increase opportunities that are available to people. Secondly, it allows for that social mobility and that class mobility that I think is really necessary, so that people can really uplift themselves in a more accessible fashion. And it also means that people are not going to be forced into the job market immediately if they don't want to. They can take the time to go to college if they want. Right now, under the current system that we have, people are often forced into the job market if they don't have the opportunity, the money to, to pay to go to school. And we need to try to make it so that they have that opportunity and that they have the option, rather than being forced into a job market that they might not necessarily want for a career. And it's something that we want to try and make sure that they have every ability to do that, because we also know that when we have people that are educated, when we have people that have healthcare, they have the opportunity to also pursue other economic opportunities and ventures that they otherwise might not be able to pursue. People are so often tied to their job for things like healthcare. They're so often tied to their job in so many regards because of that basic requirement. And I think that that is something where if we can help also lift that too, then that makes it so that we can guarantee that people have the opportunity to pursue some of those economic ventures that they want to pursue. They'll have the opportunity to start that business. They'll have that opportunity to go get that education. They'll have that opportunity to go better themselves and make sure that they have the opportunity to actually do something that they enjoy and are able to actually make money from, rather than whatever the first available gig is off the street. And I think that that is a way that we can make our economy stronger, that we can make our workforce stronger, that we can make our country and our community stronger. And I think that that's really important, because otherwise, we're going to see a continuation of people not necessarily having the skills that they need, further consolidation of wealth, and the quality of life for everyday people going down the drain.
Right. And I mean, it just sounds so much better than, you know, people having to just take what little crumbs they have and go gamble it on Kalshi or what's the other one? Poly market. You know what I mean? And just engage in the casinofication of our society. Um that's because that's not going to create any kind of upward mobility. And I think you're right that that fundamentally making the argument for these social programs is in a lot of ways a pro-business argument, because that what is the like employer based health insurance but an obstacle to
Yeah.
starting a business? It really frustrates me, because I think that stifles innovation to an incredible degree. And you know I always talk about how, like, I don't want the freedom to choose my health insurance. I want the freedom to not think about my health insurance at all. I don't want to have to be sweating all this other nonsense. I just want these programs to be here. And I don't want to have to engage in some sort of weird game, whether it's getting involved in the stock market or, doing prop bets on a basketball game, like to find some way out of the financial hole that I or so many others may find themselves in. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like knowing that I go and I work in the cold and, spend my days really like at risk of injury, uh to know that there is no upward mobility in that to
Yep.
in my own personal experience, but a lot of people that I know and I'm friends with and I work with that are, will do jobs that put their lives genuinely on the line. And they are so lionized by both political parties in this country, and yet we do nothing to provide any kind of safety net. It's like I
Yeah.
know people that I work with on construction sites that say like, "Oh, I can't get hurt because I don't have health insurance." It's like, well, dude, what happens? Like saws are scary, man, and they'll do some stuff sometimes, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I mean, I have seen people just put their hand right in a blade and be rushed to the hospital. And now that, it's like, even after healing, they're like, yeah, man, this hand doesn't really work right anymore, or they're missing fingers, or that's like, that sketches me out that it's like you are
Yep.
just one mistake by not even yourself, but maybe somebody nearby you
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
away from complete destitution.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where we have to be cognizant as to as a society as to what we provide to people, and I think that's where you know things like universal healthcare are the moral goods that we need to be pursuing, because ultimately it means that people who otherwise are worried about those types of things, they don't need to necessarily have to worry about putting their lives on the line. And secondly, if we can help solve things like the healthcare crisis, we can solve a lot of these other problems where they're not going to necessarily have to be forced to work dangerous jobs in the first place. We can guarantee that they are going to have to go through the proper safety protocols, and it's something where I hope that people are following the proper safety protocols, but it is something where people do
Yeah.
some things occasionally that are not necessarily the safest, and that's where I mean, ideally, we have a society that tries to look out for them and tries to prevent those types of things from happening, so that we can make sure that people are living their best lives, are able to pay their bills, are able to get the healthcare that they need, and aren't necessarily forced into dangerous working conditions that they could otherwise, take a little bit of time and actually do in a safe manner.
Right. Well, and it's not just that either. I mean, it's all I like look, like there are plenty of people that I know and I work with that are also they genuinely enjoy the work, you know what I mean? And there's and I do too to a certain extent. Like I really like I like that. Um but to the point of, to sort of like loop it around to the education thing again, it's like it directly tied to healthcare. It's like, okay, like let's say you do love doing that kind of work, and then there's just some sort of very unfortunate thing that happens at work that causes you to not be able to do that line of work anymore. If we don't have something like a free education system where you're able to say like, oh, well, maybe I'll finally get into a totally different field that requires using my brain more than my body that I'm still passionate
Yep.
about. It's like that there's actually a mechanism for that person to pivot in their life and find a
Exactly.
totally new career, a totally new life that they're able to live, that they can heal to the best of their ability and have the most comfortable life that they can possibly have while also having a relatively secure future through another path that helps satisfy and bolster and help grow their mental and intellectual state to a point where they're able to continue to engage and contribute with society.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree, and that's why we need to have educational opportunities for folks that they can pursue. And I think at the end of the day, knowledge is something that we can pass to each other relatively cheaply. It's not
Right.
something that you need to to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to do. And I think that it's a way that we can make sure that people have economic opportunities no matter what.
Awesome. Well, Heath, thank you so much. We've been talking for a while, so I don't want to hold you down too much longer, but it has been an absolute pleasure to have this chat with you today. And folks can go check out your website, Heath Howard for NH. Getting that right. Yes.
Heath
Or
Howard NH.com.
HeathHowardNH.com. Yes. So
Yeah.
go there, check him out, contribute to his campaign. He's really up against a lot of headwinds from the establishment with with Stephanie Shaheen, pushing back against that dynastic New Hampshire impulse. So yeah, thank you again, Heath, and we'll chat soon.
Of course. Thank you, Cotter.
All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and we will catch up with you soon. It's been a great conversation. So yeah, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel. You can support on Patreon. Usual rigmarole here. At any rate, cheers everybody, and we will talk with you soon. Have a really great week.